Turkey's president is warning that Islamic State militants are on the verge of capturing the Syrian border town of Kobane, forcing more than 2,000 Syrian Kurds to rush the Turkish border for safety, only to be turned back. Islamic State fighters have begun using weapons captured from Iraqi and Syrian forces to pound the city for days. Turkey has deployed tanks near the border close to the fighting, but they have not yet intervened. There are now reports that Turkey has asked the United States to intensify its airstrikes on the militants. These developments have put pressure on the Turkish government to act. Professor Louis Fishman studies modern Turkey and the region, and he splits his time between Istanbul and New York, and he teaches history at CUNY Brooklyn College here in New York, and he's here in our studio. Welcome to Arise America, Louis.
Thanks
for coming in. Let's talk a little bit, first of all, about the strategic importance. If ISIS does completely take Kobane, and Erdogan has says that it may fall or already fall, what does that mean in terms of this fight against ISIS?
Well, in terms of the fight against ISIS, I wouldn't say, first of all, that it changes something radically. They're right on the outskirts of the city right now. What's going to change is the dynamic of the Kurdish population there. The Kurdish forces, the Syrian Kurdish forces, are holding the town for 22 days. And basically, not the US, not Europe, and not Turkey has come to their aid. 160,000 refugees are now in Turkey, fleeing the areas around Kobane. So for the Kurds, this is extremely important. This is sort of their last stand. And if they lose this territory, for Kurds, it's very, very important. Now, what we've seen is that Turkey has, because they have their own issues with Kurds in Turkey, that they're quite worried about that this is going to spill over into their territories. Unfortunately, as of tonight, it has, just like the last 2 or 3 hours, there have been protests of Kurdish people in Turkey that are extremely upset that this group of Kurds in Syria have been left alone. They've been, over the last 2 or 3 weeks, they've been trying to cross the border to fight along with their Syrian brothers. Now, we are talking about Turkish citizens,
right?
That are together with the country in a very serious peace process for the last 5 or 6 years, the peace process moving forward. But this was sort of, the straw that broke the camel's back. They're very upset. Today, protests took out, and I've heard, as of this evening, approximately maybe 15 protesters have been killed in Turkey, which is very, very serious.
How does this change the dynamics? You talk about the peace talks that have been going on for years now, and many believe that Turkish assistance will be contingent upon, for instance, the PYD, and please explain what that is, removing its demand for total autonomy and some other nuances there. Parse that out a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, for Turkey, listen, I think what's very important about the peace process is what we see is that perhaps the Turkish government didn't trust the Kurdish, their own, Turkish Kurdish citizens that were involved in the peace process. And because the Kurds in Turkey clearly stated, if Kobane falls, that's the end of the peace process. And we see that that has not changed much. Now, why I talk about the lack of trust is it's very important, because what we see is that the Kurds in Turkey have shown that they're going to be peaceful and they're going to, move forward with the peace process. But despite this, no one came to the aid of Syria. I have to say that what we see, though, with Kobane is, of course, just not a problem with Turkish policy. This is a failed U.S. policy. This is a failed European-U.S., a coalition against Assad policy, where we see for 3.5 years, there's all these surprises happening. Even ISIS, for example, where people rightly point out that they had free movement coming from Turkey into Syria. Also this was with semi-grace to the United States that these people would be able to topple Assad. But what happened in this dynamic was, in the last 3 weeks, or even with Rojava, about 2 months, a large part of the Kurdish population in Turkey started saying, no, the Turkish government is actually aiding ISIS. Well, there's no really hard proof of this. But there was a general feeling that when they didn't save Kobane, that was it. And really, Turkish government was saying, well, we might not support ISIS, but ISIS is no different than Kurdish terrorists or the PKK within Turkey.
And there was this hope or expectation that perhaps ISIS as well as the Assad regime could be defeated at the same time, which proves to be very tricky.
This is very important. Turkey's policy, or the new Prime Minister, Davutoğlu's policy, is that it's all or nothing. Either we topple Assad and we clean out ISIS, or we're not going to do anything. But like you said, that could bring Turkey into a very serious quagmire into the region. And most Turkish people inside Turkey are not for a massive involvement or intervention in Syria. Because what are you going to get out of it? We see 3.5 years in Syria. Syria now has over 200,000 people killed in the civil war. It's a terribly bloody civil war, but it's also a result of, I would say, failed policy of the world, not just the U.S. in a sense, but also Russia on the other
Louis,
side.
I'm all out of time, and I got to squeeze this in very, very briefly with 1 or 2 words if you can.
Please.
Many analysts and experts have said that this war against ISIS cannot be won without boots on the ground, without capable boots on the ground. Turkey now is considering these ground troops. Do they have the military wherewithal to beat back ISIS?
Well, first of all, just very, very quickly, I would say that even before this, if they had proper airstrikes, we might not have reached this stage today. So all the countries are working on damage control, and that's a worst case scenario.
All right, we'll leave it there for now. Louis Fishman, thank you so much.
Thank you.